8. We stayed and ate dinner with the Blakeleys. Chris, who clearly wasn't a talker, explained that he and Delaney were close when it came to gaming, but little else. He was a line cook and avid marijuana user, and she was a holy roller, as he put it. After several hours of keeping the family's company, we reluctantly pulled ourselves from the large, comfy rocking chairs and headed back to the rental. "I don't think Delaney is in any trouble," Martin said. "That's probably somewhat true, but I question her mental health. Think about it. 5 kids in 8 years, she's 26 and a stay-at-home mom trying to do just about everything on her own. She could even have postpartum depression or just be fed up. But all of that was her choice as well. Yes, but if she is done with her family, she should make it clear. That's her husband's problem, not yours. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the family deserves to know the truth. You know how I feel about that. When Derek died, I just wanted to know the truth. No one gave me a straight answer, but I didn't stop until I discovered what happened to Derek. I still didn't have all the answers. Well, I'll probably be headed out to Utah, so you won't have to worry about being too involved in the case." "I didn't say I didn't want to be involved," Martin said, an edge in his voice. Something had been off about him for the past few months. Being stuck in a rental with him for the night probably wasn't the best time to bring it up, but I like to be direct. "What's your problem these days?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what's up with your attitude? You seem to be in a bad place." Martin sighed and shook his head. "Mom's back." Of all the disturbances in life, Martin and Derek's mother, Starla, was the worst. She was one of the most self-centered people I'd ever met, and she had a knack for making both of her sons miserable. "What do you mean she's back?" "Mom and Dad are getting a divorce, and she needs a place to stay for a while." I cringed inside, but outwardly maintained my composure. "Why is she getting a divorce?" "She and my dad aren't getting along anymore." I waited, knowing that more was coming. Okay. I know you know what's coming next, so here it is. Mom has found someone new." It would have been nice if I'd been wrong about Starla. "I'm sorry to hear that. How is your dad?" "He's shocked and angry. I don't want to get in the middle of it, but because Mom is living with me, it looks like I'm taking sides. That's tough. Try to stay out of the middle. Just let your dad know that you're doing what any good son would do if their mother needed a home." "I would love to do that, but he's currently not talking to me. He's heartbroken that Mom has moved on, because it means that she had this in the works while they were together." That was exactly how things went when she left Derek's father. She was pregnant with Martin when she revealed that the baby wasn't her husband's. "I'm sorry this is happening. Why didn't you tell me?" Martin waited before saying, "Because I know you hate her." Hate was a strong word. I didn't like Starla or how she treated her sons, but I wanted her to be okay. "If you need to get away, my place is open to you. You can stay there if you want while I'm in Utah." Martin smiled and raised his eyebrows. "Really?" "Of course. I don't know how long I'll be gone, but it'll be nice to have someone at the house." "Wait. I'm not going to Utah with you." "Not initially. But I might need you, so hang tight. You don't know how much of a weight you've taken off my shoulders. I don't want to get caught up in whatever is happening between my parents." "Great. I expect you to be your old self again. Deal?" Martin held out his hand. I grasped his palm in mine and we shared a smile. Deal. The next morning, we explored the island a bit and ate lunch at a kitschy little spot near the lake before boarding the ferry. We drove home under heavy clouds, and thunderstorms closed in as we entered the Metro Detroit area. Martin headed home after we got to my place, and I settled in with my laptop for the night. Based on what I'd learned from Delaney's parents, I understood the quest better. Her search for truth was not something that just started. Without a sound foundation in an ideology or faith, Delaney had longed for direction. While it could be debated whether or not giving a child a foundation in philosophy, religion, or some other ideology was good or bad, humans long for a guiding light, a path that can lead them to a more prosperous and happy existence. It wasn't uncommon for people without a foundation to seek out a place to lay their hat. Delaney's parents had given me a sense for her personality. Still, I was curious about what had happened in the months since they'd been in close contact with her. I scrolled through the spreadsheet of information Jeff had given me, looking for Terry Banks, the woman he'd told me to call to arrange a meeting with Delaney's friends. A cool breeze swept through the yard, rustling the leaves on the big oak tree overhead. I decided to close up shop and call Terry first thing in the morning. I woke up to an overcast sky and rain, so I skipped my morning run. After a bowl of oatmeal and 2 cups of coffee, I called Terry Banks. "Thank you for reaching out. I spoke to Jeff last night, and he told me you'd decided to take the case. How can I help?" Terry sounded excited to hear from me. "Jeff told me that you and Delaney were involved in a group at church. I would like to sit down with you ladies and ask a few questions. I just can't believe that she left on her own. I think that Bethany convinced her to leave," Terry said, her voice quivering with emotion. The phone fell silent for a short while. I counted to 5 before saying, "My hope is that you and Delaney's other friends can shed some light on things. I think someone took her. We had plans to do all types of things. Bake sales, funerals for people at church. I mean, there was so much planned. She didn't just leave. I'm sure of it. No need to inject my working theory that Delaney had taken off on her own accord. When was the last time you saw Delaney?" "I saw her at church the day before she disappeared. She was herself. Warm and kind, always willing to help others and happy." "Are you familiar with her genealogy research?" "Of course. Delaney is so good at it. It was one of the things we did together." "Are you familiar with Jebediah Christensen?" A pause, then, "I'm aware of him." "Okay. It would be helpful if you could share any information about Jebediah. He's just a distant cousin of hers." She was getting in-depth genealogy about that side of the family. Her voice suddenly sounded standoffish. "What type of information?" "Just normal stuff. Nothing special." This was the route to go. Something was there, but the phone might not be the best way to get the information. "Is there a good time to stop by and meet with you and Delaney's other friends?" "We usually get together on Monday evenings." That's what I was hoping she'd say. "Okay. What time works best?" 5 o'clock. I jotted down Terry's address and added the appointment to my calendar. After the call, I headed to the office where Martin was crouched over his desk, tapping on Delaney's computer. "Hey. Any luck?" "Nothing yet. She's not a social media person, and the websites she went to regularly are not that exciting." "How about that genealogy website her brother mentioned?" "Well, he didn't tell us the site's name, and Delaney doesn't have a username and password for it." "Of course not. She wouldn't want Jeff to come across her login details for that site." "Right. So, we probably want to set up an account and pretend to be a relative. I've already done that on a couple of sites. I decided to go with the most popular site and some of the lesser-known ones. It's probably easier to extort pleas on a smaller site than a bigger one, but the pool of victims on the bigger site will be more expansive. I don't know which way this guy is thinking, so I figure I'll test out both theories. I'll check with Jeff to see if he knows which genealogy site she frequented." "All right. I'll keep laying the bait." I headed to Terry's at 4:30. Traffic wasn't too bad, but I spent a few minutes stuck in a jam before reaching a road that connected my small city to the up-and-coming middle-class suburbs just north of Detroit. Terry Banks lived in a condominium complex inserted between wooded areas and farms. A large pot with hot pink geraniums sat beside the front door, and a wind chime filled the air with a deep tone. I pushed the doorbell and listened to a series of bells go off. A minute later, A petite woman with short dark hair opened the door. "Hi. You must be Sylvia. Nice to meet you," she said, her mouth turning up into a well-practiced smile. "Yes. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me." "Of course. We appreciate you helping to find Delaney." "Come in," Terry said, opening the door. I stepped into a spacious living room, where 4 other women were seated in various places around the room. 2 sat on opposite ends of a light blue sofa, 1 was perched on a bar stool, and the 4th woman sat in a recliner by the fireplace. "Everyone, this is Detective Wilcox. She's going to bring Delaney home." The 4 women clapped and whooped. I nodded, slightly embarrassed and simultaneously flattered. "Thank you, ladies. I'll do my best," I said. "Katie, Julia, Allison, and Kimmy," Terry said, pointing around the room. "It's a pleasure to meet all of you. What do you think is going on with Delaney?" Julia asked. She leaned forward on the bar stool and made eye contact, squinting in my direction. "So far, I have learned that Delaney had a cousin she was corresponding with. This makes me think that the cousin Jebediah, who lives in Utah, probably has something to do with Delaney being gone." "Oh," Allison, a dark-haired, olive-skinned woman with sharp eyes, said. When no one else responded, I asked, "Can you ladies tell me anything about Jebediah?" "Not really. I can tell you that Delaney seemed to be fine the last time we saw her. We meet up each Monday, and even though she is super busy with the kids, she always seems so happy," Allison volunteered. "Yeah. We all look up to Delaney. She's kind of the elder in our lives," Julia said. I smiled and nodded in an attempt to steer the women back to the direction we needed to go. I asked, "Did she talk about the time she spent in Utah?" "She mentioned it every now and then, but it didn't seem like she was longing to go back there," Terry said. "Terry, you mentioned genealogy was something you and Delaney bonded over. Is that true for all of you?" I asked. The ladies looked at one another. "We want her found, right?" Allison looked around at the other women. "Sure," Kimmy said. "Of course. That's why we're here," Terry added. "Okay, then I'm going to tell the truth. Mrs. Wilcox, that was one thing she had been a little weird about. That guy you mentioned. Jebediah, he was telling her some pretty crazy stuff," Allison responded. "Yeah, he would bring up old stuff," Kimmy said. "Can you elaborate on what you mean by old stuff?" I asked. "I only heard her mention that once," Julia said in a hushed tone. "But she did mention it," Allison responded. "There's no way Jeff was going to be on board with that," Terry said. "No," the other women said in unison, shaking their heads. Silence filled the room. I let it hang there like a cloud, waiting for someone to reveal the big secret, even though I was pretty sure I knew what it was. Delaney was getting into. "Allison!" Julia yelled across the room. "Do you want her found or what?" Allison asked. "We do, but we want to be careful. Detective Wilcox, what we're about to tell you is in no way something we believe. Julia, I'm not here to judge, and if something is too sensitive, you don't have to share it. Just keep in mind that the less I know, the less chance I have of finding Delaney and bringing her home." Katie sighed and looked around at the other women before saying, Delaney was becoming interested in polygamy. Knowing that they were uncomfortable, I gently nudged the women with a quiet, "Can anyone elaborate?" "Okay, so she met this cousin online in this genealogy group. It was exciting, because Delaney had Mormon ancestors she'd never heard about. We all thought it was great that some of her forefathers—" "Don't forget about the foremothers," Katie said between clenched teeth, cutting Terry off mid-sentence. "Pipe down. Okay, Katie, foremother, or whatever you want to call her, but she also had a husband, so... Anyway, there was an aunt and uncle that lived in the Strangite community on Beaver Island, and they moved amongst the other Mormon churches after the Strangites were over." "They never were over," Katie said. "Please stop interrupting," Julia said in a calm voice. "So the aunt ended up moving west and starting a second family." That's usually what the guys did. Not the women, Kimmy added. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why it was so interesting to hear about this lady. She left and followed what she thought was right, started a new family, and didn't see the other kids until she was on her deathbed. She's on the branch of the family tree the weird cousin comes from, Terry said. Delaney's parents told me that the rest of the family fell away from faith altogether, I said. Right. Delaney sees this aunt as a spiritual mother. That made the find super intriguing. The cousin is also hot. And since he's a very distant cousin at this point. Allison's cheeks turned red, and she threw her hands up in the air. Delaney may have a crush on him, Katie said. You believe there is a chance that Delaney had developed romantic feelings for this cousin? Sounds weird when you say it out loud, but yes. I think we all came to that conclusion, right, ladies? Terry asked. I did, Julia said. So did I, but I thought the cousin angle might stop her from actually acting on her feelings. You know how you might have a crush on your older cousin or a middle school teacher. Those crushes are harmless and help build an appreciation of the person, but once you realize it's crazy to think about being that person's wife or something like that, you let it go, Kimmy added. Terry nodded and said, Jeff is an awesome guy. I mean, I have a great husband and wouldn't trade him for the world, but Jeff is amazing. He has built his own accounting firm and bought Delaney the house of her dreams. That's why I don't buy the idea of her going to Utah on her own. I think she's being blackmailed. What is the genealogy website Delaney was using? It's called kinship.com. It's smaller than the other genealogy sites, but that gives it a cozier feel. Most of the people on there are part of our faith, so it often feels like one big family. People become friends on the site. It's like a replacement for social media. I noticed that Delaney doesn't have a social media presence. None of us does. We challenged one another to take a break from social media a few years ago, and decided that life was better without it. Katie said. The genealogy was definitely her online social outlet, Terry said. Are you ladies on the site as well? No, we've all done our genealogy. Delaney's a convert, but we were all born into the faith, Allison responded. What can you ladies tell me about Delaney's marriage to Jeff? They were high school sweethearts, and she waited for him to come back from his mission. A true love story, Terry said. What do you ladies think happened to Delaney? I think she made a mistake and was blackmailed. There might be pictures or something like that, and someone may be demanding money from her, Julia said. It was a decent angle to explore, but money could be delivered electronically. There was no reason for her to travel to Utah if someone was extorting her. I think she just needed a break and intends to come back soon, Kimmy said. That doesn't make any sense. She could have just gotten a sitter and taken a night off. You're right, Terry. I think she might be done, Julia said. Why do you think that? I asked. She was happy on the surface, but I think she was kind of depressed. Jeff is still trying to build his business. He was picking up odd jobs here and there while trying to get his firm off the ground. Delaney wanted to stay home, but I think she underestimated what that would be like after they had little Clara. So, you think she was at a breaking point? Could even be some postpartum depression. Clara is only like 7 months, Julia said. I spent a few more minutes listening to the 5 women debate whether or not Delaney was depressed. When there was a lull in the action, I asked, Is there anything else you ladies would like to tell me about Delaney? The women shook their heads and agreed that they'd told me all they knew. I thanked them for their time and left. On the drive home, a series of questions swirled in my mind. Had Delaney left her husband and children for her cousin? He was a distant relative, so in terms of biology, it wouldn't be that strange. Was there a financial angle to all of this? She had withdrawn a large chunk of money. Or had Delaney just taken off to start a new life? How did Bethany fit into the picture? I followed up with Jeff, letting him know I'd talked with Delaney's friends. Were they helpful? Possibly. I'll have to look into what they told me tomorrow. Can I ask, what did they tell you? I'm desperate for information. Honesty was best when dealing with clients, but I had to use some discretion. What if Delaney's friends were wrong? They told me that Delaney was fascinated with genealogy. That might have something to do with her leaving. I am going to see what I can find out from the genealogy site she uses. I think the one she used the most was kinship.com, but I'm sure there were others. I'd start there first, because that's the one I remember her raving about. 9. Martin and I showed up at the office around the same time the next morning. I found out the name of the genealogy site. I said, kinship.com. You really don't need me, do you? Don't be deterred by my impressive detecting skills. I owe all the glory to Google. Martin sat at his desk, kicked back, and put his feet up. Based on her search history, Delaney was on that site more than she was anywhere else on the internet. I set up a profile and used the data she'd put on her family tree to add some ancestors for Sam Blakely. My hope is that she'll see me, the fake cousin, and interact at some point. Meanwhile, I've been chatting with some of her distant relatives. Nothing major. Just end-of-the-world chatter. What did the friends have to say? Well, they seem to think there is a possibility that Delaney took off to Utah to be with her distant cousin. I know I'm always encouraging you to take cases, but I don't know about this one. It's so weird. Agreed. Not to mention, it's going to get expensive. I'm going to have to go to Utah. That's a given. I've been looking into the place. What do you know about Utah? The Great Salt Lake is there. Okay. That's a good start, Martin said. But there's more. There might be a bit of a problem with going to Utah for work. Really? Why? You need a license to practice there. Are you serious? Yes. So let me get this straight. I have to live there and get a license to work as a private investigator? That's right. I'd worked cases in Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky in the past. There'd never been any reason to consider getting a license for those states or moving there to practice. Why is Utah an outlier? They don't like outsiders. So I need to go there as a tourist? That would be your best bet. Got it. I can be a tourist. Why? Any other helpful information from Delaney's computer? Nothing too interesting. She's not very active online. I'll check out the genealogy site. Maybe that's where she hangs out. Keep chatting with those folks. I'm going to head to Utah in the next few days. Jeff is going to set me up with his cousin, who was their pastor, to get more information. After that, I'll probably head to Salt Lake City because there's a rumor Delaney is around one of the neighborhoods there. Are you sure this lady didn't just run away? No, but if she did, she may have had a nefarious reason for doing so. She's an adult. She has a family. They deserve answers. When she is ready to give them. I feel like we should drop this case. I shrugged. If you don't want to work it, I can handle it myself. No, I meant both of should walk away. You know me better than that, right? Glutton for punishment. Faith. Our quest to enhance meaning, and at times strive to create a depth that simply isn't there. Sometimes that drive to have elusive answers causes us to make bad decisions. Many leaders have been guilty of imposing a high level of demand on followers, while failing to meet the bare minimum of their own standards. I feared that Delaney had fallen prey to such a situation. But what if she was happy? It was a tough question to tackle, because the scant clues I had could go either way. Before purchasing a ticket to Utah, I wanted to get more of an idea of where Delaney might be. I called Jeff that afternoon. The Avenues is a part of SLC Delaney always wanted to live in, so I think her being in that area sounds plausible. I plan to fly into Salt Lake City and stay at a hotel downtown, so I'll be close. Do you have any contacts in SLC? Not really. Like I told you, my cousin Ron is happy to meet with you, but he's in Provo, which might as well be in another world. One thing I think would be important to do, and I know this is going to be uncomfortable, is that you visit the local church. I plan on it. Great. I'll text you the address. That would be the place where I'm sure you'll find her, if she's still in the area. Jeff sent a text of the address, and gave me his cousin Ron Jurgensen's number. Before we got off the phone he said, "Thank you for taking this case. I can't tell you how much we need Delaney back." I took a quick look at the forecast for Salt Lake City. The temperature varied wildly. I decided to pack a variety of items, ranging from clothing for late spring to winter gear. I bought a ticket to Salt Lake City with dates spanning a month between touchdown and the return flight. 3 weeks to get information and find Delaney, and 1 week to convince her to come home. My fingers itched as I completed the purchase. Utah was not on my must-see agenda, but after booking the flight, I looked for a hotel in Salt Lake City and was impressed by what I saw. I'd heard about stunning deserts and some breathtaking mountains, but those had just been passing snippets of conversation. Suddenly I was more intrigued by Utah and the case. Living in the midst of breathtaking mountains before moving back to Michigan would be a bit of a letdown. While Michigan was beautiful in places, Utah was absolutely stunning. Perhaps Delaney simply wanted to move back to Utah, and was forcing the issue. After packing clothes to get me through 3 weeks, I loaded my 9mm, and I double-checked to make sure I had everything I needed, and climbed into bed just after 9. Martin was at the door at 6 a.m. the next morning, ready to drive me to the airport. I don't understand why I can't come. I hadn't considered taking Martin to Utah with me for 2 reasons. First of all, this sounded like a voluntary disappearance in reality. I wasn't going to find someone who was kidnapped. I was going to seek out someone who almost certainly had decided to leave on her own accord. Secondly, I didn't want to budget for Martin to tag along. Yes, he was a real assistant, but the position was created mainly to help keep him safe until he was mentally prepared for law school. Now that the arrangement had been in place for several years, parts of me hoped it would run its course soon. I thought that maybe boredom would cause him to look elsewhere for employment. I could never fire him, but I didn't know how much longer I could afford to pay him a decent salary. "Martin, I don't think there's going to be much to do. This woman left on her own. To be honest, I'll probably be back in less than a week. Meanwhile, you can stay here and see clients. Don't do anything while I'm gone, but if someone comes in, do an intake and let me know." Intakes were quite a challenge, because the information gathered directly affected whether I thought the case was worth taking. Martin could be pretty dramatic at times, but he'd mellowed a bit over the years, so I felt confident leaving him in charge of initial interviews. "You've been studying for the LSAT, right?" I knew the answer to that question, but thought throwing it out there would help him recognize he should be focused on something else. "I can work on that, and be an assistant. My mom says that sounds like a good plan." A clear sign it was a bad idea, I thought. Most of the time, I held my judgment when it came to Starla, but now that they were on speaking terms again, I felt like I couldn't let it go. "Just keep in mind that her choices tend to be poor in nature." Silence filled the car. It was too far, but I couldn't help myself. One son had already been lost to a career in law enforcement. Why set up a second son for the same fate? "I'm sorry. I just don't want to lose you. I have to make my own way. And you seem to be enjoying your place in law enforcement. You've always talked about going to law school. Or at least, that's what Derek told me. I can change my mind, can't I?" As we pulled up to the airport, I let the conversation die. There was no reason to leave on a bad note. "Thank you for driving me to the airport." "Sure. I want to do your brother's memory justice. He would want me to take care of you. That's all I'm saying." "Love you, pal," I said before grabbing my bag from the back seat and getting out of the car. 10. The flight was on time. I was just starting to doze off when the pilot came over the loudspeaker and said that we would begin our descent into Salt Lake City International. As I peeked out the window, beautiful red rock formations and mountains jutted up towards the sky. I pressed my face closer to the window, my mouth gaped in amazement. I had never seen such beauty. The mountains were snow-capped, and gorgeous patches of green lined the slopes that stretched down to the valley's edges. My head spun as we came in for a landing, causing me to feel as if we were upside down. Staggering off the plane, I collected my luggage and headed to the car rental. Mountains surrounded the city on all sides. Downtown greeted me with wide, clean streets and a mix of historic and newly constructed buildings. At the hotel, a smiling woman with a soft, accented voice handed me 2 keycards to a room on the 3rd floor. On the way up in the elevator, I was greeted with more pleasant smiles and people who seemed to be in a good mood. Friendly, clean, and hospitable. So far, SLC seemed entirely lovely and beautiful. Once in the room, I called Jeff's cousin and arranged to meet him at his church around 5 that afternoon. He'd sounded extraordinarily kind. I grabbed an apple and string cheese from the concierge in the lobby and hit the road. Provo, Utah, was nestled against the side of the Wasatch Mountain Range. A temple's spire loomed in the distance, strategically visible from the highway and the main thoroughfare through town. The downtown was idyllic, and even though I'd just arrived in town, I felt a sense of safety. It felt like I was in Mayberry. The downtown was quaint and small, but the main road structures told me that it was growing. Ron Jurgensen ran a basketball camp for teens in the early evenings at the church, so he'd asked me to meet him there. Downtown was moderately busy. I admired the clean, orderly streets. Provo looked like a model for a Norman Rockwell. Americana at its finest. It was on the bench of a mountain range, and the parking lot provided spectacular views. I pulled into a space and got out of the car, taking a few moments to stand in awe of nature's magnificent display. Severe granite ridges etched up towards the sky. After a few minutes, I caught myself. "Focus," I muttered before heading to the church. I entered the church and was greeted by a large man with a bright, wide smile. "Mrs. Wilcox. Thank you for coming up. Let me show you around. Thank you for meeting with me, Bishop Jurgensen." Bishop Ron Jurgensen was at least 6 feet 4 inches and somewhere around 230 pounds. He had a sharp pointy nose, square jaw, and a small bald patch peeked out from feathery thin brown hair around the edges of his ears. His smile was genuine, and I immediately felt at ease with him. "I appreciate this very much," I said. He smiled and motioned toward a room down the hallway. "Of course. It's my pleasure. I was afraid something like this might happen to Jeff and Delaney. I'm so sad to hear that she's taken off." That was an intriguing thing to say. I nodded my head but didn't respond, hoping he'd say more. A minute or so passed before Bishop Jurgensen said, "She had gotten overzealous before they left." "Is overzealousness amongst the faithful uncommon?" I asked, as we entered a small office on the left-hand side of the hallway. "That's the right question to ask. Have a seat," he said, motioning to a chair in the corner of the room. Bishop Jurgensen folded his large body onto a chair, allowing me to have the more comfortable, large reclining seat. "Jeff told me that people are very devout here. How does that play out?" "As a bishop, I want to see a thriving, faithful congregation, and I have that." Delaney and Jeff were part of the congregation for a couple of years. They were friendly and faithful. Delaney started reading some books by metaphysical teachers, and things started to change. I could tell she was slipping into a dangerous place. I talked to Jeff about it, and he said that she'd stopped it. Bishop Jurgensen shook his head and asked, "Do you have faith, Mrs. Wilcox?" "I do." "Then you know how it goes. A faith-promoting talk can lead some to pray, and others to pray." "Yes. I have seen radicalization in my own church. People get caught up in ideology and run with it." The bishop sat still for a moment before saying, "People read things from the past and don't apply the current context to it. Most of the time, it's innocent enough. No one goes off to start their own church, but sometimes that's exactly what happens. Delaney spent a lot of time with an energy healer who also claims to have visions. The lady seems harmless enough when you meet her, and she's a charming mother of 7, but we've had talks about some of the information she's introduced to other members. What type of information are we talking about? Healing rocks, channeling, and energy work. Once someone put a bug in my ear that Delaney was at something that sounded like a seance. I mentioned it to Jeff, and he tried to explain that things like that can be dangerous. I think he tried his best, but a few months later, I heard that she was at a woman's house against for a channeling session. This was when she and Jeff began to fight. Who is the woman that ran the group? Her name is Rebecca Morley, middle-aged, so she's kind of a mentor to the younger women. That's why I have to keep an eye on her. She pulls the young ones into her little group, and before you know it, I start hearing about healing crystals and auras. Within a few weeks, there was a guy, an agitator of sorts, who started to saying he was getting messages from beyond. Did he create a breakaway sect? No. He was talked to, and that stopped the guy from taking it too far. Have you heard from Delaney since she's been here? No, but Rebecca mentioned that Delaney, Jeff, and the kids were moving back to Provo. That's when I called Jeff, and he told me what had happened. I asked around, and found out that Delaney had shunned Rebecca because she didn't believe in the channeling part of their metaphysical deep dive. Jeff told me that Delaney is probably in Salt Lake City now. Have you heard that rumor? Everyone I've spoken to has said she's gone, possibly to Salt Lake. She claimed she was going to find a house for the family. Of course, that doesn't make any sense, but people are trusting here. They believed her. We believe Delaney may be involved with a cousin who apparently has some alternative spiritual views. Really? That's crazy. I really hope that's not true. Can you think of any people who might be in fringe groups where the alternative beliefs may have escalated? I know a guy. He doesn't work in this area in an official capacity, but he saved his sister from a splinter group. After that, he went on to assist in the rescue of a few other women. He's not perfect, but he's the best option I can think of. Sounds like he's exactly what I'm looking for. How much does he charge, and where does this guy live? North Ogden. It's a small city that sits just where the name says it does, north of Ogden. As far as payment, he's not that type of guy. He's just good-natured and likes to help people out. You think this guy is open to helping me? Yeah. Brady's a sweet spirit. Quiet and warm. Lives alone. Hard-working, kind-hearted man. Bishop, may I buy you dinner? You've been such a big help to me. Better yet, how about coming to my house for dinner? I'd love for you to meet the kids and wife. Thank you for the offer, but I'm the one that owes you something. Nonsense. You come to dinner, and I'll set up a meeting for you with Brady, the guy in North Ogden, for tomorrow. Would I say? Is it a deal? Bishop Jurgensen was nice, but I wasn't sure I wanted to head to his house. How far is North Ogden from here? It's a bit of a drive. Don't change the subject. I promise to put you on the right path. Come meet Molly and the kids, and I'll give you directions. If you go this evening, it's going to take about 2 hours for you to get there, so you might as well eat now. I really couldn't think of too many objections, and it was already 6:30. Okay, you've twisted my arm. Great. Let me dismiss the boys. They've been practicing in the gym. Come on in and meet them. We headed out the church's back door and walked across the parking lot to a second building. Inside, a group of teenage boys ran up and down the basketball court, lobbing a ball back and forth. All right, boys. Let's wrap it up, but before you go, I want you to meet my friend, Mrs. Wilcox. Hello, Mrs. Wilcox. Nice to meet you. A chorus of young men's voices, ranging out from baritone to soprano, filled the air. Hello, boys. Sorry to be the reason your practice was cut short. It's no bother, a freckled-faced boy said, grabbing the ball that was hurtling towards him. She's a detective, Bishop Jurgensen said. That's so cool, one boy said. A few others followed up with similar responses. I noticed how respectful the boys were. They didn't ask what I was investigating or pry in any way. Instead, they all came up to give me handshakes and polite farewells. After that, Jurgensen turned off the lights and locked up, and we headed for his place. Since Bishop Jurgensen lived 2 blocks from the church, we decided to leave our cars in the parking lot and walk. I did my best to keep up with the long, sweeping strides of the bishop, while he told me simple stories about the area and gave me some trivia to chew on. The small brick ranch sat behind a white picket fence. Before the Bishop Jurgensen could unlatch the gate, the house's front door swung open, and a flood of children of varying ages came thundering down the stairs. "Daddy! Daddy!" they yelled, grabbing onto his legs. The joyous reunion of the father and children went on for a minute or so. Then a tall, smiling woman came to the door. She was balancing an infant on her hip. "Hello," Mrs. Jurgensen said, shifting the baby to her right hip and holding out her hand. We shook, and she invited me in. "I hope you don't mind an extra mouth at the table," I said. "Of course not. I'm so glad you're here. Molly, this is Mrs. Wilcox, a detective from Michigan." "A detective? That's intriguing, Mrs. Wilcox. Please call me Sylvia." Molly towered over me, her long brown hair falling over her shoulders. She was wearing a long flowing white and pink striped dress, tapered at the waist with matching pink pumps. Her eyes, warm and dancing in the sunlight, focused on my face. The house had minimal furniture and an open concept, making the living room look larger than it was. The oak wood floor was polished, and the living room led directly into the kitchen. An island countertop with 3 white stools was the only indicator that one place was ending and a new one was beginning. 2 wicker chairs sat adjacent to a small end table, and a large leather sectional wrapped around the room's edge. 2 boys were setting silverware on the kitchen table, and 2 girls were intricately folding napkins. The boys insisted I sit in between them, and the older girls asked me questions about being a detective. Molly sat a large serving tray with pasta in the middle of the table with tongs, and a large bowl of spaghetti and meatballs. "Homemade sauce," Molly said. "Smells delicious. Thank you so much for having me over." "It's really our pleasure. We love having people over for dinner." The home was warm and cozy, and the family's chatter and laughter put me at ease. After dinner, we discussed historical sites I could visit while in town. Then Jurgensen gave me directions for the trip out to North Ogden. The visit was so pleasant. I hated to bring up Delaney, but I had no choice. "Molly, what can you tell me about Delaney?" Molly's cheeks turned red and her eyes grew wide. "Well, I don't know much about her. She's a lot younger and she is boisterous. I prefer a quiet life." "No observations?" "Tell her what you told me," Jurgensen said, lightly touching his wife's knee. "Oh. I don't want to give the wrong impression. Her family is really struggling without her. I just want to find her and get her back home," I said. "Okay. Yes, those kids need their mama." So this isn't necessarily true, but I got the impression that Delaney was not happy with Jeff. She would constantly complain about him. "Go on, Molly. Tell her the last part." Molly sighed and frowned at her husband before saying, "I believe Delaney has been cheating on Jeff and has moved here to pursue the new relationship." "Do you have any particular reason to believe that?" "Yes. Delaney was obsessed with this lady and her family that did the same thing back in the 1800s. We were never close, but I've heard the story from others who spent a lot of time with her. Rebecca, a lady from church, told me that Delaney was dabbling in strange things that involved a distant cousin. Rebecca is always a little bit out there, if you know what I mean, but even she was leery of what Delaney was into. Do you think Rebecca would be open to talking with me?" we asked. "Rebecca's crystals told her not to talk with you," Jurgensen said, shaking his head. "Fair enough. No. She's a loony. Ron, we don't talk that way." "You're right, sweetie. I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilcox. Here's the deal. Like I mentioned at the church, Rebecca is into New Age stuff. She has crystals that she says have healing powers, and some that predict the future. She clears spirits in seances, and she has been known to cure people of ailments that never truly go away. We aren't into the metaphysical stuff, but essential oils and rocks are popular here. Most of the time it's harmless, but Rebecca can take it to an extreme point. I hope the crystals switch in my favor. Ron nodded his head and said, I think they will be. Rebecca is all about ceremony. She's probably at home determining an allotted time that will make it look like the magic crystals have spoken. Ron drove me back to the church parking lot in his wife's car around 9 that evening. I thanked him for his help and headed back to the hotel. Martin called me first thing in the morning. I put him on speakerphone and headed to the small coffee maker on the desk. I've got some good stuff for you. I'm all ears. What have you found? The kinship site is basically a discussion board. Looks like Delaney was calling herself Zion Bound on there. Are you sure that's her? Did you get into her account? I didn't. I still using the fake profile. This Jebediah guy is popular, and he uses his real name. He reaches out to people on message boards and has an extensive genealogy that leads back to Adam. Are we talking about the biblical Adam? Yes, that Adam, but it doesn't stop there. He claims to be related to various famous people, including British royalty. His ridiculous chatter attracts a lot of women, and he presents as this valiant, perfect gentleman, thinking he has a lot of time on his hands. That must be what the money is for. Right? I wonder how many women he's been able to recruit. That's a great question. What else do you see on the site? He has interacted with at least 20 women as far as I can tell, but I'm sure there are more. Cedar City is listed as his home. He pops in a pic of the place now and then. Is that close to where you are? No. It's south of Salt Lake City. It's gorgeous there. You'll probably need to head that way, but it's important to note that he's nuts before you go. How crazy are we talking? He's created an entire theology about a divine fracture in the space-time continuum. Really far out stuff. Something about being reincarnated as the chosen one who will lead people into the next world. There's talk of Armageddon and storing money and food. Some of his language is coded, so I can't say exactly what is going on, but it sounds like he's planning something. Jebediah also runs a paid forum to share secret knowledge and instructions on what's coming. Predictions or prophecies? Sounds Jim Jones-ish. Correct. I've been posting in the forum, so Jebediah might start to woo me. The main point of his ideas seems to be a bunch of rhetoric about the world's end. God is coming soon, so his followers have to do things. The name of his group is the Church of the Divine Fracture. Catchy. Sounds like money. Most churches do. Anyway, that's what I've found out so far. How are things coming along in Utah? Jeff's cousin told me about a woman named Rebecca. She's into crystals and channeling, so that lines up with what you're telling me. I think there's a connection there. Sounds like it. So this woman, Rebecca, she's in Provo? Yes, so that makes me think maybe this is more widespread than what we initially thought. This isn't just about Provo, or Salt Lake City or Cedar City. Maybe we've got something going on throughout the state. And where was the cousin's body found? In the desert near Lund. It's a ghost town, but it's not that far from Cedar City. I wonder how big this group is. I'm thinking it's sizable. I'm headed out to North Ogden today to meet with a guy who has helped to get people out of different cults in the area, including his sister. Would you work your magic and find out more about this Rebecca lady? Sure thing. I'll text you her full name. Okay. Hey, before you go, I looked into Bethany and it's just what Chris and his parents were saying. She's got a rap sheet. Mostly petty theft. There is one assault charge, and a few drug charges from when she was in her 20s. She is indeed on marriage number 3, and it looks like that was headed to a divorce, as Chris told us. She actually was very active on social media, so I'm sure the police are following that trail, but she was posting about her experiences with using her third eye to connect with a collective consciousness. The way she talks about it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think she's trying to say that through meditation she's able to connect, literally, with a collective brain. She said this connected consciousness sends her messages. Did she elaborate on what type of messages she was receiving? No, I think that might be why her social media accounts are still up. Usually, when somebody is dead under suspicious circumstances, the police will either lock the account or have it listed as private, but this account is still visible. I think it's partially because nothing on it makes any sense as I read through it. I figured out what she was talking about, but it was pretty convoluted. But from what I can tell, all voluntary. Maybe Delaney wants to be there. I want to talk to Delaney. Jeff hired me to find out what's going on with his wife. I intend to do just that. But she bought a ticket and left. Yes, but she might not be on board with this program anymore. Obviously, if she is happy, I will just report back to Jeff and come home. This could get dangerous. Should I buy my ticket now? I chuckled. Settle down. Let me see what happens before you come out. So what's the plan? I'm going to meet up with this Brady guy. He's like some type of cult rescuer or something like that. Good. This is a new world. You're going to need someone familiar with this type of thing. 11. Bishop Jurgensen called soon after I got off the phone with Martin to let me know Brady was willing to meet that day. I hopped in the shower and got dressed before heading to the lobby. A spread of fruit, bagels, and the fixings for waffles lined the counter next to the receptionist's desk. I grabbed an orange, bagel, and coffee from the Continental breakfast bar and sat at a small table wedged in between a counter full of supplies and a door. I jotted down questions I wanted to ask Brady while I ate, and gave him a call when I was done. Thank you for meeting with me. What time works best? Any time. You can come now if you want, Brady said. Okay. I'll see you in about an hour. I left immediately, taking Interstate I-15 north. The valley twisted and into flatter land before climbing back into another valley. The drive was easy, but the beautiful scenery was distracting. Utah, mysterious and forbidden, was whispering in my ear. After driving to a place that felt like the edge of civilization, I exited the highway. A spattering of businesses, fast food restaurants, and gas stations filled the town's first few blocks. Then it turned into open fields with mountains in all directions. 5 more minutes down the road, I hit an intersection where the speed limit dropped to 30, and a sign welcomed me to North Ogden, Utah. The streets were idyllic and quiet. Carefully manicured lawns and middle-class homes with modest acreage plots lined the streets. Brady's house was a cozy red brick bungalow 3 houses from the corner, a few blocks from the main road. A huge, unruly thicket of evergreen bushes covered the front yard, providing a substantial amount of privacy. The house was flanked by 2 driveways, and a large structure sat in the back. I parked on the street behind the bushes, branches gently scraping the car's edge, and climbed out of the car. The block was still, and the homes lining the street were designed in various shapes and sizes. The architecture told me that most of the dwellings had been built between the early 1950s and late 1970s. I marveled at the different styles the builders had incorporated. Ranches and bungalows were prevalent, but a few newer 2-story homes were sprinkled in. I headed to the front door, meandering around the large bush and looking for a walkway. When I didn't find one, I reluctantly trekked across the grass and climbed onto the small porch. Feeling exposed and awkward standing on the tiny uncovered porch, I rang the doorbell. After waiting a short while, I rang the bell a second time. Just as I began to consider leaving, the lock tumbled, and the door creaked open, revealing one large blue eye. "Hold on," a low guttural voice said. A few seconds later, the door opened wider. "All right, come on in," the man said, pushing the screen door open. A man with a messy, thick mop of blonde hair hanging down to the middle of his back gave a friendly nod. "Hello. Are you Brady?" "Yeah. I'm Sylvia Wilcox, the detective Bishop Jurgensen told you about." We locked eyes for a moment. Brady's pupils were large and steady and unassuming. We shook hands, and Brady motioned for me to come in. "Thank you for taking the time to meet with me." Brady shrugged. I waited for him to respond. When he walked over to the couch and plopped down, I moved in front of him. "Mr. Kepler." "Brady." "Okay, Brady, the woman I'm looking for is named Delaney. She spent some time in Provo and possibly Salt Lake City, and now she hasn't been heard from in a while. She may be in central or southern Utah. Do you know anything about the groups down there?" "Yeah. I'm familiar with them." "Are they dangerous? Can you tell me where they are? What do I need to know?" Brady patted the couch cushion next to him. Mister?" "It's just Brady." "No, mister." "Sit," he said, patting the couch again. I reluctantly took a seat next to Brady. A few seconds passed before he said, "There is always a level of danger when you're dealing with these groups. I can't tell you how dangerous, but there will be a risk." "Okay. Have you heard of a group called the Church of the Divine Fracture?" "The exact group doesn't matter. There are too many to keep all of them in mind. They are all a variance of the same ideas. Not too hard to figure out what they're teaching." "Tea or coffee?" "Coffee, please." Brady moved slow and easy through the house. He asked questions from the kitchen while he brewed the coffee. His voice was warm and controlled, and I could see why Bishop Jurgensen had suggested that I connect with him. "Have you been to Cedar City?" I asked. "Yeah. It ain't gonna be much of a city for someone like you." "Hell, it wasn't much of a metropolis for me either. It's a little place, and there ain't much happening down there, which I think makes it ripe for cults." "Why do you think that is the case?" "Honestly, I think it's the vastness of the desert and the feeling that you're far away from things. You feel free, and sometimes you get inspired to get a little reckless. I've had that feeling in the desert before. I've taken trips where I ended up in an old min shaft or explored a cave. Not the brightest thing to do, but you just feel wild and uninhibited in the desert. At least that's how I feel." "Interesting. I'll be heading there in a few days. What can you tell me about the area?" "You have to be careful. You don't want to get stuck out there by yourself, and it's important to be prepared. I know that desert well. My dad is military. He took us out to the desert, up in the mountains, and everywhere else in his Jeep. He wanted us to be tough and smart. That was a good thing. When my sister hooked up with a guy in a cult, I went through a lot to get her out." "How do you take your coffee?" "Black." "Thanks. So I'm guessing the area is pretty rugged." "Very. Red Rock Mountains, all that good stuff. There are little settlements around there, so that's different from a lot of the desert. Even so, if you get lost out there, you better be prepared. Water, food, and satellite phones are necessary." Brady handed me a mug of coffee. "Good to know. I'll get those things before I head there." "So, how did your sister get mixed up with the cult?" "She ended up meeting a guy in the city." "So, is it usually a religious thing or a financial scheme?" "Both. Religion is used to extort money from the members. I mean, that's nothing new, right?" "You're right. Using religion for financial gain is an old trick." "What do you know about the cult this lady has joined?" "They are the chosen ones, and the end is near. The leader is a man who claims to have a genealogy that stretches back to the biblical Adam. I know at least one woman withdrew $10,000 from her joint bank account before heading his way." "Okay. Then it sounds pretty standard. Is it hard to get to these groups?" "It can be. The ones in rural areas are tough, because they're the only people around. You could be caught in their own little private justice system, so you have to be careful. The desert and mountains are very popular for that reason. The cops aren't going to be in your way, and neighbors are sparse. It also means that you are the law. If someone comes on your property and you happen to shoot them dead, there's not going to be an investigation." We have parts of Michigan that are like that. Vigilante justice is a thing in isolated places. Yeah, and there's something else you should know. What's that? Some people actually believe in whatever the guru is teaching. That can make rescuing someone very difficult. If she's in the desert, isolated and in a dangerous place, it's something to think about. You could be putting yourself in a lot of danger. Good to know. Anything else? Tomorrow, I'm visiting the church she attended a few weeks ago. If I find that she'd gone south, I'll be heading to Cedar City Monday morning. Brady stared off into space for a moment before saying, "Call me before you leave morning. I might be able to go with you to Cedar City." Really? Yeah. I have a few projects I have to get done, but I'll head down there with you if I can pull that off. That would be great. I will give you a call before I go. You also can call before that if you have questions. I'm happy to help. Thank you. Want a coffee to go? I've got some takeaway cups. Brady's generosity and warmth continued to surprise me. What a nice man. Thank you, but that's okay. I've had my 2 cups for the day. I thanked Brady again and left his place at 10 after 3 that afternoon. After sitting in traffic on I-15 for an extra 20 minutes, I finally made it back to the hotel. Ready to settle in for the evening and do some research, I stopped by the deli in the hotel lobby and picked up a kale salad and a French dip with fries. The au jus was the perfect mix of onion and savory broth, and I decided to splurge with a glass of red wine. At the end of dinner, my phone buzzed. Someone gave me a tip about where Delaney might be, Bishop Jurgensen said. Perfect. Where? She may have rented an apartment on C Street between 200 East and 300 East in the Avenues. That's odd that she rented a place. Sounds like she plans on staying for a while. Unfortunately, that might be the case. Delaney went to church 2 Sundays ago, but she didn't show up last week. There's a chance she'll be there tomorrow, so make sure that you go to the ward for that area. I'll text you the address of the meeting house you want to attend, along with the location of the place we think she rented. Thank you so much, Bishop. Of course. I hope you can track her down soon. Talked with Jeff last night, and he sounded absolutely beside himself. The next morning, I headed to the church Delaney had been spotted at the 2 weeks before. The brick building was similar to the church in Provo, in that it was nondescript with naked walls. Expensive sharp suits and ankle-length dresses made up the majority of the members' attire. Everyone was dressed in their Sunday best, and smiles and handshakes were plentiful. I'd chosen to wear a long gray summer dress with white flat sandals. Before the service began, I mingled with the members, making small talk. I watched a group of 20-something women, with their children, happily chatting in the corner. As the service began, quiet chatter continued around me. Babies cried, conversations went on, and cell phones rang periodically. The sour look of disappointment crossed the face of a woman sitting beside me. I shared her disenchantment, and found myself unable to hear most of what went on. I waited for the bishop to head to the mic, but he never did. Instead, a flow of people headed up to the microphone to give talks. I was reminded of Southern Baptist revivals, without the rollicking flow of gospel music. Midway through the service, I started getting antsy, and wondered if my time could be spent more effective by checking the apartment Delaney supposedly rented. I quietly edged my way out of the pew, and headed for the back hallway. I felt the heat of another person following close behind. When I made it to the hallway, a hand caught my elbow. "Excuse me." A quiet voice called behind me. "Yes? You aren't leaving, are you?" "I was just visiting. I didn't know the service would be this long, and I have an appointment soon." "I'm Lindsay Carter." The woman held her hand out. I gave her a firm shake and realized that this was the best-case scenario. She was alone and eager to chat. "My name's Sylvia. I'm actually looking for a friend." "Oh? Who?" "Her name is Delaney Whitby." "How do you know her?" "You're not from here," Lindsay said. It was more of a declaration than a question. That's right. Did you just move here? I'm here on business. My friend Delaney told me she'd been coming here. That was a few weeks ago, but I thought I'd surprise her by showing up, but she's not here. Lindsay reached out and gently touched my hand. We can talk about it after church. Come on back. You can sit with us. There was no getting around it. I had to go back in. The service continued. As I was getting ready to bolt out the door, everything came to an end. Eager to ask my questions and move on, I was headed off by introductions to Lindsay's husband. We have a new friend, Lindsay said to her husband. I didn't catch your name, he said, holding out his hand. Sylvia. Welcome, Sylvia. Did you just move here? No, I'm just in town for business. Oh. How long will you be staying? Hard to say. This is my husband Alan and our children David, Neffy and Sarah, Lindsay said. A long, lanky man towered over Lindsay and I. The 3 children had scurried away from their parents, rushing off to chat and play with friends. The daughter wore a lovely blue satin smock, and the boys were dressed in full suits, looking like little businessmen. Their father also wore a pressed gray suit. It is nice to meet all of you, I said, continuing to inch toward the door. Where are you from? Lindsay asked. Back east. Where back east? Ohio. So you know Delaney Whitby? Oh yeah. She told me she was taking a trip a while back. I think she was going south to visit a long-lost cousin. She's an old friend. I need to get in touch with her. We'd love to hear from her too. I've been texting her but she stopped responding. When was the last time you talked to her? She was here 2 weeks ago. I think the first time she was here was about a month ago. Delaney needed help getting settled, so we were pitching in. Have you had any contact with her? There have been a few text messages, but nothing in the past week. I don't know my way around town that well. I'm trying to get to Delaney's apartment. I'd like to leave her a note on her door. It's super easy to get there. We'll walk you over. We live close by. The avenues were a beautiful, eclectic neighborhood, with swaths of green spaces tucked in between impressive Victorians and Tudors. The streets were clean, with impeccable landscaping running along the edge of thoroughfares. Moving through the city was easy. Similarly to Detroit, it was laid out with a neatly planned grid system that helps travelers navigate without being familiar with the city. The Carters walked with me past historic turn-of-the-century houses that ranged from mini mansions to multi-family units and medium-sized homes. We chatted about the beautiful spring weather and what it was like to live in Salt Lake City. I kept it light to keep from inducing suspicion. I hadn't told them why I wanted to talk to Delaney, other than she was an old friend. The less they knew, the better, just in case they did happen to talk to her. Thank you for showing me the way, I said. Shaking their hands. I waved as the family walked away, waiting for them to fade out of sight before stepping on the porch. Doorbells lined the wall opposite the entrance, indicating that the house was split into several apartments. I knew Delaney's apartment was number 3, so I pushed the button and waited for a voice. Who's there? An accented voice came over the speaker. Hi there, I'm looking for a Delaney Whitby. Oh. Hold on. A few minutes later, a tall man with messy hair emerged from the door marked Apartment 1. That lady you're looking for, we're looking for her too. Who are you? Sylvia Wilcox, private detective. John, he said, holding out his hand. We shook, and he pulled the door closed behind him, stepping out into the hallway. Why are you looking for Delaney? I asked. Well, she moved in a few weeks ago after giving the landlord a sob story. The landlord felt bad for her. So he let her move in without paying a security deposit or a full payment for the month. Benny, our landlord, is old, and since I've lived here for 10 years, I kind of look after the place and make sure things are okay. I cut the grass, do a few repairs and stuff like that. Well, there was a leak, and I needed to get into Apartment 3, the place she's renting. I knock, she doesn't answer. I leave a note on her door. She never removed the note, and I started to wonder if she was still around. I don't think she ever got it. I called and left a message, but she never called back. Finally, it got to the point where I had to go in without permission. So no contact since Delaney moved in. No, and now that the rent is due, we don't know how to find her. The cell phone is turned off and she has stuff in there. Not a lot, but we need her to get it out or pay the rent. When was the last time you saw Delaney? About a week ago. She left on foot one day and I haven't seen her since. Did you have any conversations with her? No way. She was really into New Age strangeness. I'm not into that kind of stuff. I just live my life, have a good time, and try to be a good person. How did you know she was into New Age topics? John looked embarrassed. The walls are thin. It's understandable if you heard something by accident, I said, giving him confidence I didn't think he'd been eavesdropping. She would wait until late at night, and then she'd call up someone named Anna. They'd talk about magic crystals and communing with the dead. The last night she was here, she seemed angry with this Anna lady. Do you remember any specifics? She would debate with this Anna. I don't remember everything she went on about, but it was strange. She'd talk about the spirits she was in touch with. Anna was the name of the ancestor Jeff said Delaney was obsessed with. Is there anything else you can recall? No. What do you know? I chose my words carefully. I've been hired to find her. Currently, I know she's missing. That's about it, but if I come across any information that's pertinent, I will pass it along. I thanked him for his time and left. 12. That night, Martin called to check in. Did you convert yet? Ha ha. Very funny, mister. How are things back at home? Quiet. I just took the LSAT yesterday, and I've just been hanging around your place, drinking all the wine. What? You took the LSAT? Really? I didn't want to tell you, until I officially took it. I've registered for it twice in the past, only to cancel. But this time I did it. I'm so proud of you. Thanks. It felt good. So what's going on in Utah? Lots. Jeff's cousin found the apartment Delaney had rented, so I stopped by there. Her neighbor told me she had arguments with some lady named Anna. This is interesting because there is an Anna in Delaney's life, but if it's the woman I'm familiar with, she lived and died in the 1800s. Oh. Wow. Do you think she's really been going on about things with a ghost? I don't know. Maybe there is a cousin who is named after the great-great-great-aunt. That's possible, but I don't know what state of mind Delaney is in. The husband might need to hire a shrink. No doubt. The argument she'd been having with Anna was about what church she should attend. Then one day, she just walked away from the apartment. Interesting. I went to church this morning and talked with some people who met Delaney. She told them she was going to see a long-lost cousin. So we have confirmation that she at least was intending to head south. That's great. You've made a lot of progress in a few days. I too have made some strides. Oh yeah? Let's hear it. There's a lot of chatter from Jebediah about the Church of the Divine Fracture. Apparently, the end is near, and there is a gathering of people who are chosen. They will be ushering in either the apocalypse or some sort of divine intervention. They are building a place for Jesus to live here on earth. How many people would you say are chatting about this event? There are about 7 women who seem to be into this thing. There are mentions of Zion Bound, and there's been speculation that she's in Cedar City. I think Delaney might be a hero of sorts to these women. Her username has been mentioned in several posts. What are they saying? Just that she's so brave and righteous. Nothing eye-opening. Okay. I'm heading to Cedar City tomorrow. That's going to be about 3.5 hours from here, but before that, I'm going to search for family and friends or Jebediah. I want to get a feel for this guy before I come across him in the desert. Good plan. Maybe they'll even let me stop by. I don't know, but I'm giving it a shot. Will you do a little more electronic recon on the Church of the Divine Fracture? Yep. I'll dive deeper into their digital footprint, and I'll continue to hang out on the genealogy site. The next morning, I took my laptop to a coffee shop and spent the day researching Jebediah Christensen. The first thing I came across was his record. He had been arrested for a few petty crimes over the years, and his mugshots progressed from a clean-cut, innocent-looking young man to a scruffy, ragged grifter. His eyes were bright and clear, and despite the surprising transformation, his gaze was steady and sure. Jebediah looked like a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Digging through a few more search results revealed that he had graduated from high school 12 years ago and lived in Colville, Provo, and Cedar City. A resume saved to a job website showed an erratic work history. He'd worked at a few restaurants and factories. Still, it looked like staying employed was a bit of the problem for Jebediah. 6 months at a burger joint, 9 months at a factory, and several gaps in between jobs. The most recent entry was made a year ago when he worked for a Cedar City financial solutions company. Another search showed that his last official residence was in Colville, Utah. Perhaps he was living with friends in Cedar City. A map told me that the Colville property was about 45 minutes away. It was located on the outskirts of the small town. I found an email address for Jebediah's mother. I typed out a short message explaining who I was and explaining that I was looking for a missing person I thought might be with Jebediah. Short and to the point. After sending the email, I called Martin. I was just going to call you. Guess what I found out? What? The Church of the Divine Fracture has a meetup planned. It sounds like a revival, and it's going to be in Lund. The chat board is rather lively. One guy has been asking for advice on how to get his wife on board with joining this group. A lady who lives in the area advised him to take her to this get-together in the desert. A friendly setting for changing minds, is how she put it. Interesting. When is it, and who is the guy? It's taking place next Wednesday evening. It's open to everyone, so you could go to that. I think the guy is this financial planner that lives in Cedar City. Still checking a few things on that, but I'll keep you posted. I think I'll do that. What else do you see on there? Strange conversations about the second coming. This Jebediah guy knows the date and the time apparently, and he's encouraging people to sign up for his religion ASAP. If they miss the deadline, there's no joining once the second coming is in progress. It's a familiar tactic. Cult leaders make joining a pressing issue to take advantage of their followers financially or sexually. How do people fall for this crap? Every few years, there's a new group saying it's all going to be over. Hasn't happened yet, but people still buy into it. Cults collect people who are hungry, looking for something more. Back in the late 1800s, a group believed the world was going to end on a certain day. When it didn't, some members literally lost their minds and had to be housed in asylums for the rest of their lives. Surprisingly, that wasn't the end of the faith. That religion morphed into a modern-day expression that still exists. Wow. That's interesting. From what I've learned about Jebediah, he seems to have had trouble fitting in. Since high school, he's worked several low-paying jobs and has moved around a significant amount. I emailed his mother, informing her that I'm looking for a distant cousin with Jebediah. Hopefully she gets back to me soon. 13. Janice Christensen returned my call the next day. In a sad, low voice she said, "We didn't raise him this way. You can't control what your children do." "That's the truth," she said. The words dripped with deep bitterness. "Thank you for responding, Mrs. Christensen. I am sorry to contact you out of the blue and bring up the issues with Jebediah. We've expected it. Jeb has been out of touch for a while, but we know what he's doing. People keep us informed. How can we help?" Providing background information would be very helpful. My schedule is free today. Are you available to meet? The kids and my husband will want to be here. Can you come around 3? I looked at my phone. It was 1:30. Yes. I'll be there. Mrs. Christensen gave me directions and ended the call. I turned back to my computer and spent the next 20 minutes digging through Jebediah's online presence. His social media involvement was sparse. There were a few posts on Facebook, but his Instagram account didn't have any posts. I was able to find an old blog he'd used in high school and during his religious mission to Brazil. The blog posts contained the most concentrated digital information about Jebediah. His posts were idyllic and naive, not uncommon for someone in their late teens or early 20s. The first few entries included the line, "When you have the truth, nothing else matters," several times. It was almost like he was trying to convince himself. The last entry was solemn and bordering on hopeless. I don't know what this means, but the promises made to me have not been kept. There must be something else. I spent time skimming the blog, looking for more information on Jebediah's marriage. It was curious that Jebediah didn't mention his wife's name. He called his wife his helpmate, almost as if she was more of a placeholder than a lover. There was a picture of him and wife on their wedding day. The two of them wore solemn, tight-lipped smiles. As I scrolled through pictures from their wedding day, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for them. They both looked so young and, judging from the look in Jebediah's eyes, so lost. I headed to Colville at 2 that afternoon. The interstate twisted higher and higher through the mountains, carrying me to an elevation that left me feeling a bit lightheaded. A relatively short drive delivered me in an area that looked remarkably different from Salt Lake City. Colville was a small town surrounded by rolling green hills. The main street was tiny and quaint, with local stores lining the road. Old homes were spaced out, giving the residents plenty of land to themselves. The newer homes looked oversized and out of place. I drove to the edge of town, past the cemetery, and turned down a narrow, windy mountain road through beautiful countryside to get to the Benningtons' home. The family lived on several acres of land on the outskirts of Colville. Sitting back from the road, a modest structure with a plethora of windows, solar panels, and thick greenery that let me know the family valued their privacy. If you didn't know to look for it, the house would remain hidden behind the scrub brush and evergreens. A half-circle drive surrounded by grass and freshly planted crops to the north was paved in front of the house. The residence was a more recent construction of a split-level structure, built with the increasingly common gray stucco exterior. I parked at the end of the driveway and headed for the front door. Before I reached the porch, a fresh-faced, slender woman with shoulder-length brown hair stepped out. "Mrs. Wilcox," she said, moving towards me with her hand outstretched. "Mrs. Christensen, thank you for taking the time to meet with me." "Of course." She gave my hand a vigorous shake and invited me into the house. We stepped into the foyer where a man, 2 teenagers, and a 20-something stood. They all wanted to be here. Darren's the only one missing. "He's on his mission in Japan," Janice Christensen said. "We're all concerned about Jeb." The 4 seemed to move as a group, with the father approaching for a handshake first, followed by the son and then the 2 daughters. "I'm Doug, Jeb's dad. This is Shelley, our second oldest, Lynn, who is number 4, and Tanner, who is our lucky number 5, Doug Christensen said, pointing to his 3 children. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," I said. "We really appreciate you looking into this," Shelley said, her voice quiet and soft. "Let's get right to it," Janice said, motioning towards the long white L-shaped leather couch in the family room. Once everyone was seated, she said, "We never expected things to turn out this way. Jeb is our first, and we love him so much, but we were young. I was 19, and Doug was barely 18 when Jeb was born. We made mistakes. Do you mind if I take notes?" "Of course not," Doug said. I pulled out a small notebook and pen, and jotted down Janice and Doug's ages when Jeb was born. "I know what you're thinking, but he wasn't technically born out of wedlock, and I wasn't a teenage father. I'm not Jeb's biological dad, but I'm the only father he's ever known. And he's mine, if you know what I mean." I officially adopted him. Janice's face reddened at the explanation. Silence fell over the room for a few seconds before she said, I was married for about 6 months when I was 18. It was a high school romance situation. Looking back, I realized I didn't even really know him. I nodded and continued to write down notes. She always wanted to be my sweetie. I was just too young, Doug said. Mom's a cougar, Shelley said, elbowing her younger brother. The kids shared a giggle. Give me a break, Shell. The family went back and forth with the cougar joke for a while. Sorry about that. We like to have fun, Doug said. We better get back to Jeb. This is serious, Tanner said. Yes? Thanks, Tanner. He's my serious kid, Janice said. Jeb was also serious as a child, but he lightened up as he got older. Not about his beliefs, Lynn said. Yeah, you're right. He was always serious about his faith, but during high school, he fell away. We don't force the kids to attend church. It's their choice once they become teens. We're low pressure about that type of thing. Janice smiled lovingly at her son before saying, I'm glad you think that, Tanner. It's more important to have healthy, happy kids. Would you say that Jeb's loss of faith in high school made things difficult for him? Not really. Lots of kids experience that in high school. He did, however, start dabbling in crystals and channeling. We were nervous, but figured he'd outgrow it. Jeb wasn't super devout or anything, but since he was born into the faith and had been active at one time, I think many of his friends thought he'd return to church after a while. Once a member, always a member? I asked. Correct. I even fell away for a time. It actually helped me become a better mother. I learned that a person's faith didn't make them a good or bad person. I didn't know that growing up. It's still hard in high school around here if you're different, Tanner said. Are you going to tell her what you mean? Lynn asked. Mrs. Wilcox, anyone who is different has a hard road in this town. I'm different. I don't broadcast it, but I also don't try to hide who I am. Do you know what I mean? The teenager's eyes were wide and serious. Tanner, I absolutely understand. I went to a boarding school in Connecticut for high school. I was the only black student, and there wasn't a day that I wasn't reminded of that fact. It can be tough to be different. Then you know something about it. Jeb has always been good to me, to all of us siblings, but people still whisper about him around town. They think we might be like him. Being gay and his brother makes me some type of double outcast. But we still love living here, Shelley piped in. That's right. We love it. This was our great-great-grandfather's land, and we want to be here. But there are also hard things about living here. Our family is easy, but the town can be harsh. That's good information to know. Thank you all for being so frank. Can you help me understand what caused Jebediah to leave? That's a great question. So Jeb has always been searching for something more. The maternal side of the family is mapped out for centuries. Janice's ancestors came to Colville and lived right here. It's a thing of pride, because they were so prominent in the town. My family history in the area began when a woman named Anna moved here, after leaving her husband and kids. She lived in Salt Lake City, but one of her sons moved to Colville, and my family has been here ever since. It's a bit scandalous because Anna, my great-great-great-grandmother, totally abandoned her family, but people like nice stories. Since Jeb is the product of a high school sweetheart situation that ended after a few months of marriage, he latched on to my aunt's story. His father Seth is nice enough, but his family is from Evanston, Wyoming, and over time they migrated back there. This is a small town, and your connections matter. Having a strong foundation on both sides of your family is important. You live on the reputations of your ancestors. My family is prominent and recognized as pioneers that helped build this place. Janice's family is known for being great business owners that have always been financially successful. It gave Jeb some clout, and the history is so accessible. How long has Jebediah known that he wasn't your biological son? When he was 7, his father came to town on business. He showed up at the door and stayed for about 10 minutes. It was a terrible way for him to find out, but Seth didn't mean any harm by doing that. He never wanted the responsibility of a child, something he neglected to tell me until we were married. Seth isn't a horrible guy, but it was clear from the first day of our marriage that we wanted different things. Motorcycles, long road trips, living in a yurt, that was how he saw his life. When I told him I was pregnant, he said we should look at our options. At that point, we fell into a cycle of arguing and agreed that a divorce was best. Is Jebediah in contact with his father now? I doubt it. Seth could reach out now and then when Jeb was a teenager, but they never really developed a relationship. Some of Seth's family made connections with Jeb, but we left it up to him to maintain those bonds. He really loves Doug's family, so he always had a maternal and a paternal side to embrace. We were open, but we left it up to Jeb. He never seemed too interested, Janice added. He's 26. Maybe they talk and we just don't know it, Shelley said. That's true. To be honest, we haven't had much contact with Jeb in the past year or so. About 2 years ago, he asked if he could stay here for a while. We were excited to have him home. He'd been living down in Salt Lake, working here and there. The idea of helping him get on his feet warmed our hearts. Janice is speaking for all of us. Jeb has so much potential, and we were all ready to support him through whatever was happening, so that he could be successful. What career path was Jebediah pursuing at the time? When asked, he'd just say that he wanted to be great and make a lot of money. After a few months, I started to wonder if he planned on making that money from some type of business. Such as? We thought maybe he would join his sister selling essential oils. The crystals and seances were scary, but he told us he was just learning about those things. We asked him about it, and found out that he was having visions. Or at least, he claimed he was having visions. We were, of course, worried about his mental health. At that time, we'd watched him move from one low-paying job to the next, and we thought having him at the house would encourage some type of change. Everyone in this household is doing their best. These two are killing it at high school, grades, soccer and volleyball, and just being great humans. Shell is the best newlywed in town. Happy, supportive of her soldier hubby. Janice is a top salesperson at the essential oil company she works for, and I own a car dealership in Park City. Life is good, and we wanted Jeb to get on the same path. I was listening and writing down notes, but in the back of my mind the phrase, being great humans, stuck in my head. Had Jeb given off the impression that he was not a great human? Did the family unknowingly project that onto him? Did he mention what he saw in the visions? Here's the kicker. He would only share the visions if he was speaking at a paid event, Doug said. Was he able to secure speaking engagements? Well, if you asked him that question, he'd say yes. But these were underground meetings with some of the more eccentric people in town. Initially, we thought he was just showing up and talking to people. But when we found out that Jeb was charging money for these sessions, we put our foot down. Janice, tell her about what you walked in on. Oh, Doug, I really hope that was just something silly. The detective needs to know. Janice sighed. Okay, but this was totally out of the ordinary for Jeb. He had never done anything like this before. That we know of, Shelley added. Okay. Here it goes. We have a few small structures on the property, sheds and places where we store small equipment. We have restored some, and we keep canned goods and other essential items in some. Others are full of tools. One day, I headed out to grab a can of corn and Jeb was there with this young woman from our church. He's doing something weird, some type of seance or something. Of course, I was alarmed and interrupted, causing the woman to rush away and leave immediately. When I asked Jeb about it, he told me he was reading her energy. It was kind of creepy, Doug said. His eyes were wide. He told me that it was a gift from God. We argued about it, and eventually, sadly, Jeb told us that he was able to read people and channeling the dead. A seer is an exact word he used, and this was scary because that's what Anna, my great times 3, called herself. There are tons of beautiful, faith-affirming stories about her. Still, once I was an adult, I did my own genealogy search and found out that my grandfather had made copies of her journal. He was reluctant to give me one. I waited for more information. Doug's cheeks had turned red. This was hard for him. She considered herself a prophetess and visionary. The things she wrote. I mean, I couldn't help but question her sanity. The good news is that Jeb is not biologically related to her, so there isn't any carryover genetically. Unfortunately, I think he's come to identify so much with Anna that he's taking on a similar persona. It's like she's a thought ancestor for him. Fascinated, but not sure where to begin with questions, I hoped that Doug would keep talking. It's a way to make money, Shelley said. We don't know what to hope for. Should we hope that he's just playing the role of a charlatan? Or would it be better for him to have a mental ailment? He's such a good person. I leaned toward the latter, but what if he just got so fed up with not being successful that he decided to rip people off with faith? We'll give you a copy of Anna's journal. It might be helpful for you to read through it. Thank you. I appreciate that. Do you think Jebediah felt left out and thought that connecting with a spiritual ancestor is a way to bring him closer to the family? Janice nodded her head. He felt left out. It wasn't something that happened all the time, but there were moments when it was unavoidable. I mean, look at the girls. They take so much after Doug, and Tanner has his dad's personality. Jeb didn't have those bloodlines, and it showed. He looks so much like Seth, and he's got a bit of that wild streak. They need to be free and push the boundaries all the time. He gets all that from his dad. You tried so hard, Shelley said, reaching across the couch and touching her mother's knee. That's true, Tanner added, slipping his arm around his mother. I tried to imagine a guy who'd started a cult amid this love fest. Where did Jebediah fit in? To be honest, I think he liked being a black sheep. Lynn. It's true, Dad. He just seems to want to do the opposite of what we're doing. It's like so forced. Maybe he can't fit into the box we need him to be in. He went on a mission and got married. He did the things he was supposed to do, and it didn't work out, Tanner said, his voice laced with anger. We're talking about Jeb, not you, Lynn retorted. I told him not to get married. Why is that? Well, he seemed to have it in his head that he was going to get married no matter what. He did well over in South America and came back more advanced. A boy went on a mission, and a man came back. He came home and was determined to marry his sweetheart. But something happened, and she said she couldn't marry him. He never told us why, but I think he may have been talking with her about seances or something like that. So he didn't marry his sweetheart. Nope. The girl he married was someone he knew in high school, but there had never been anything between them. Jeb came back and she pounced on him. Jeb is attractive, and at the time, he was a great catch. How old was Jeb when he got married? 21. He'd been home for 3 months. We were supportive, but we did advise against it. I even used myself as an example. I did the exact same thing. Only I was the girl in the scenario. Nothing going on, waiting for a returned missionary to marry. He didn't think it was the same thing. How long was Jebediah married? About a year. His ex-wife has since married and had a few kids. She's a nice girl. They just weren't right for one another. After the divorce, he moved to Salt Lake for a while. Then he came back here, and last year he told us he was heading south. Have you had contact with him since he's been down south? About 6 months ago, he told us about an opportunity in Cedar City. Jeb calls everything an opportunity. Even if it's total junk, Lynn said. That's somewhat true, but this time around it was a financial services company, so we were hopeful. Those jobs seem to be very productive, and Jeb can be convincing. So, he was becoming a financial planner? Something along those lines. A few months later, Jeb called and said things were going well. That was the last time we saw him. He stopped by to ask if he could borrow money, and we didn't give it to him. After that, the calls petered out to an occasional text here and there. You should talk to Jeb's ex-wife, Shelley said. I think that's a good idea. Do you think she'd be willing to meet? Yeah. I'm still friends with her. I told her a detective was gathering info on Jeb. She was concerned and asked how she could help. I'd be happy to talk with her. Great. I'll call her, Shelley said, bouncing off the couch and grabbing her phone out of her back pocket. What happened to the girl he initially wanted to marry? She got married and moved away. Basically, Jeb freaked her out when he got back, but she never really talked about it. I think she's in Vegas now, Doug added. She's just right up the road. Ready to meet in town when you are? Shelley called from the kitchen. 14. Valerie Solis agreed to meet me at a park near the cemetery. She was sitting on a bench near a small water fountain. You must be the detective, Valerie said, standing up and holding out her hand. I am. Sylvia Wilcox. Thank you for meeting with me. We shook and sat down on the bench. Of course. I want to help. Thank you again. Do you mind if I take notes? Not at all, Valerie said. I pulled out a notepad and pen and waited for her to begin. So here's the story. We grew up together. When Jeb was a kid, he was unruly. It was like Jeb was angry all the time. During high school, he got mixed up with the wrong crowd. We were good friends, so I tried to help him turn things around. Eventually, we ended up married. Anything you feel comfortable telling me about your marriage might be helpful. There's not much to tell. Jeb's first choice turned him down. I was kind of a backup. At the time, my self-esteem was too low to acknowledge that fact. I kept my eyes on the notepad and scribbled notes. Jeb was odd. He would have me sit on the floor of our kitchen, knee to knee, and try to reach our ancestors. I wanted to get married. I've always been too skinny, too plain in the face, and I didn't think I'd get another chance. Turns out I was wrong. I'm now happily married. Heavenly Father had a plan for me. I should have been more trusting in his plan. Did Jeb discuss any other beliefs? Yes. Crystals were a big deal for him, and he told me that he could reach creative consciousness or something like that. Collective consciousness? That's it. Yes. Jeb said there was like a big brain that he was tapped into. He'd ask me all these questions, things I never thought about. I just went along because I was a scrawny, scared kid. How did others react to these ideas? For the most part, people ignored him. Would you say he was an outcast? No. I wouldn't say that. Jeb is attractive, and people respect him. Even when he was going down the wrong path in high school, his knowledge was respected. He wasn't someone that posed a danger. When did you last see him? Probably a year ago. He was in town, just aimlessly walking through the streets. Nothing major. I almost bumped into him, because I was carrying groceries. Was he still attending church then? Yep. Jeb was obsessed with the end of the world, and every event, floods, fires, even arguments, were signs of the time. No one wanted to hear those things, but most just nodded and smiled. But he would get mad when people chose to not engage his crazy talk. Within 6 months, I realized that our marriage was not going to make it. It was devastating back then, but I'm so glad we split. Did you have much contact with his family? Yeah. The Christensens are great. Jeb was different when he was with them. I don't know why things changed with him. I've heard that they don't really talk to him anymore. Is that strange? Kind of. When we were married, he was very close to his family. Jeb really loved his siblings. Being a big brother was something he truly cared about. His family is very accepting and loving. This crazy path he's taken has nothing to do with them. If you want to know what's going on with him, look to the past. An email with Anna's journal attached was in my inbox when I got back to the hotel. There was a lot of religious jargon, But the most interesting thing was how miserable Anna seemed after arriving in Utah. She wrote about the intense loneliness she experienced and the harshness of the desert. As I skimmed through the journal entries, I could see that she was descending into insanity. She started to reach out to dead relatives because she was so lonely. She was the third wife of her husband, and most of her days were spent alone until she started to have more kids. Anna went on to have 3 more children, but eventually she was committed to the Territorial Insane Asylum in 1919. I closed the document and sighed. What a sad life. Why would Delaney want to follow in this woman's footsteps? I shut the computer and called Braylee. I'm leaving a little early for Cedar City. I won't be able to leave for a few days. If you get in trouble, call. I'll come down and get you out of whatever mess you end up in. Thanks. I appreciate your kindness. I can come down in a day or 2. Just have to finish up a few projects. That would be great. We'll take care of business, and then I'll show you some of the beautiful places around there. Brady's voice was warm and friendly. I stopped the enthusiasm I felt rising in my throat and simply said, "Okay. See you then," and got off the phone. This was a case. This was business, and there was no room for personal feelings to come into play. The guy was overly friendly and attractive, but that wasn't why I was in town. The plan was to go to Cedar City and locate Delaney as soon as possible. I needed to find her, make contact, and determine whether or not she wanted to head home. After that, I would go back to Salt Lake City and book the first available flight. I grabbed a sandwich from the deli in the hotel, packed up my things, and hit the road. The Utah spring seemed to fade and wane, oscillating between mild temperatures in snow-capped mountains and hot summer-like days. Traveling a few miles in any direction could change the scenery and the forecast. Elevation dips and climbs altered the temperatures on a recurring basis. As I drove along I-15, the terrain alternated between mountains, foothills, and flat land. Most areas were sparsely populated, and I hadn't seen a city since leaving Utah Valley. I was approaching Cedar City, the main town in the vicinity of Lund. The map told me to take a dirt road from the highway about 30 miles southeast, and I would run into the former train town. I'd read that Lund was never a big place, but the installation of I-15 had caused the town's population to drop to next to nothing. Lund had died, but in its absence, the area became a place for survivalists and others who wanted to live off the grid to set up shop. I pulled into town around 5 that afternoon and booked a room at a motel right off the highway. The clerk, a short woman with long red hair and bright green eyes, didn't acknowledge my arrival. She was tapping on her phone and avoided eye contact while she checked me in. The transaction was completed within 5 minutes. She slid a key across the counter before turning her attention back to her phone. "Thanks," I said. "Sure." Still no eye contact. I took the key and headed to the room. The faint smell of bleach greeted me when I opened the door. The place was simple and clean. There was a queen bed covered with a floral print comforter, a small coffee maker on the counter, and a small flat-screen television mounted on the wall. The price was significantly less than the various chain hotels around town, and I was satisfied with the level of cleanliness. Cedar City is not a destination, but it was a pit spot for some and a gateway for others because of its proximity to national parks and monuments. So the little motel was doing itself a favor by keeping the rooms nice. Pamphlets extolling the virtues of exploring the road less traveled were spread out on the small 2-top table near the window. Stories of nearby uninhibited trails to explore. Being more than an hour or more away from the national parks would allow travelers to avoid large crowds and enjoy nature. I could see the allure of empty trails and beautiful, sparsely populated scenery. There was a bit of danger and intrigue involved in the idea of heading out into an unmarked, open and empty landscape. In terms of those interested in more of an urban adventure, history would be the draw of Cedar City. Not an old city by any means. There were buildings from the early 1900s that had been persevered and were still in use. The place was pleasant, and the friendly vibe was enhanced by the posters and flyers for the Shakespeare Festival and various college organizations around town. A small state university was close to downtown. Initially, it was hard to imagine what would attract college students to the place. Still, the breathtaking views beyond the city and the proximity to the breathtaking views were explanation enough. Spring break camping trips into the rugged backcountry, and winters spent skiing just a few miles from school would be enough to attract some. There was something quaint and soothing about the place. Safe and small, it would also be a great place to raise a family. I finished flipping through the pamphlets, grabbed the key, and headed for downtown Cedar City. Cedar City was small, but much more significant than most of the towns surrounding it. There was a harsh desert on one side and red rock on the other. Main Street in Cedar City was a quaint little strip that incorporated the past and present in a slick, harmonious chord. Historic buildings had been maintained, but newer outcroppings worked to meet the demands of a growing populace. Even so, Cedar City felt like Mayberry, and it didn't help that I stuck out like a sore thumb. Luckily, everyone I passed on the street was willing to respond to my greeting or smile and nod. So far there'd been one consistent thread during my trip: Utahns were nice. The town's history had been preserved in the colorful brick church, fashioned from red rock mined from nearby canyons. Patrons weaved in and out of the cute shops that lined Main Street. Passing by a few commercial food chains, I headed for a small diner-style restaurant. Both the lobby and the kitchen were filled with teenagers. Loud chatter competed with the thump of a 1980s pop soundtrack. I ordered a bacon cheeseburger and shoestring fries, and headed for an empty booth at the back of the restaurant. The fries were limp, but they were hand-cut and fresh. I pulled out my laptop and began weeding through the digital data I'd gathered about Jebediah. His last address was in the heart of Cedar City, located near the college, but that was from 3 years ago. I decided it couldn't hurt to walk by the place. After finishing my meal, I mapped out directions to Jebediah's old residence and drove in that direction. The small house was a few blocks from Southern Utah University. It read through previous rental listings and realized that the house was not split into apartments. It served as more of a boarding house than separate living quarters. Shared housing was an intimate experience, even if the occupants didn't socialize much. Talking to the roommates would be ideal, but the owner would also have information about Jebediah. Cold calling doesn't always work, but I decided to give it a try. I located the number of the owner on the expired advertisement for the room for rent and punched it into my phone. A woman answered the phone after the third ring. "Hello," she said in a hurried voice. "Hi, I have a potential renter that put you down as a reference, and I wanted to call and see if you could tell me about your experience having them as a renter." "Oh. Okay. Which renter?" "His name is Jebediah Christensen." The woman let out a harsh laugh. "He put me down as a reference?" "Yes." "Oh wow. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves. Obviously, it's your choice to rent to anyone you want to. Maybe you're desperate to get someone in your place or something like that, but under no circumstances should you rent to that man." I pulled out my notepad and pen. "Why is that?" "Well, he basically created his own little harem on my property. He even convinced one of the other renters to join in. These guys had 8 women sleeping on the floor, cooking and cleaning for them, and extolling that Jebediah Christensen was some type of prophet. The other renter told me what was going on, but I thought he was being a stick in the mud at first. I don't police the people that live in my properties. They often had different values from me, but once I looked into things, I realized that this was too much. Jebediah Christensen was running girls out of my place. As soon as I found out what he was up to, he and his cronies were out of my property." "When you say running girls?" "Yep. It's what you think. He was basically a pimp. These women were in bad shape mentally. He'd convinced them the end of the world was coming soon, and he needed money to build a place in the desert to be his own little Zion. He would research their families and claim to channel their dead ancestors, who would tell them to follow him. So they started doing whatever he wanted. The strangest part about it was that I thought I'd get better renters if I went with older people. None of the renters were students. One was a recent graduate, and Jebediah and the other guy had gone through divorces. They were starting their lives over, so I rented to them, thinking that I wouldn't have any of the trouble I had when I rented to students. Boy, was I wrong. Was Jebediah arrested? Silence filled the phone. I waited. The woman sighed. I'm single and retired. The rentals keep me afloat. If there's some type of problem, I don't know what would happen. You don't need to hear all this. I guess I should just say you won't find any information about this from the police.